Okay, so in this video, we're going to be talking about finite and non-finite verbs and verb forms. So in order to do that, we're going to start by talking about the base form of verbs. So the base form of verbs is something that we usually talk about in relationship to the infinitive. And the infinitive is the word to plus the base form of the verb. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So to be, to love, to sing. Be, love, and sing are all the base form of the word. Of these particular verbs. So that is kind of the form that we start out with in terms of the verb. So this becomes very helpful for getting us to kind of think about the relationship between finite and non-finite forms of verbs. And you can kind of think about finite verbs um, as finished verb forms. Um, and what that means is that they have a tense, which is always going to be present or past. Those are the only tenses that we have in English, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later. But that also means that they need a grammatical subject, okay? And the reason for this, and I'll scroll down just a little bit to make sure that you can see what it is that I'm saying, and I will zoom out just a smidge, is that you need a subject in order to match the verb form with. Okay, and I'm going to give you a couple of illustrations. So what you see over along the side is I, she, he, they, we, you. So these are subjective pronouns. These are pronouns that are in the subject form. So these are going to function as our grammatical subjects. And I will just write this here. So that way, if you guys are looking back, you do not forget. Okay. So in order to create then a finite verb, now we match present or past tense to the subject. So since we started above with the base form to be, we're going to go ahead and start with that. And then we'll move on to love and sing so you can kind of see how this works with several different types of verbs. So the present tense of the verb be is am. So you would say I am or I was past tense, right? I am hungry. I was hungry. She or he is hungry. She or he was hungry. They are hungry or they were hungry. We are hungry. We were hungry or you are hungry. You were hungry. And you, the verb form remains the same. The finite verb form would be are or were here, whether or not we're talking about a singular you or a plural you. Okay. So all of these are finite forms of the verb because they have a grammatical subject and they match that subject in terms of tense and conjugation. Okay. Next, we'll take a look at love. So I love or I loved. She, he loves or they loved. They love or loved. We love or loved, and you love or loved. Okay. So far less complicated when you're dealing with a regular verb like love. Be is an irregular verb, whereas love is a regular verb. Okay. And then we're going to talk about sing, just because the way we do the past tense is a little bit different. So oftentimes, as you see here, we do past tense by adding the ed. That doesn't happen with every single verb. So we would say I sing or I sang, right? He or she sings or he or she sang. They sing or sang. We sing or sang. You sing or sang. Okay. So sing as a base form is still regular in that we can anticipate how it will be conjugated or how the tense will be changed. It's just not going to happen with the ed. Instead, we're changing that I to an A. So in that way, it's a little bit more irregular. Now, all of these are finite forms of the verb as long as they appear with the subject or with an implied subject. Where things start to get a little bit tricky or a little less familiar is as we start to move into non-finite forms of verbs. So we're going to talk about these. So one way of thinking about them is to think about them as not finished forms of verbs. And so what that means is they have no grammatical subject. Okay. And don't show tense. Okay. So I'm going to give you a couple of different examples using these same verbs. So here are a few illustrations. So for instance, we might have being, right? Being on its own does not have a tense. It's neither present or past. And here is an example in a sentence. So being afraid helps no one. Okay. Here, being afraid is actually functioning like a subject, and helps is actually the verb for the sentence. Okay. So even though being itself is a verb, it's not functioning like a verb in this sentence because it has no grammatical subject and no tense when it just ends in ing. Let me give you the example of loving, right? They snuggled close, right? Loving every moment. Okay. Loving every moment on its own is not a complete sentence, right? Snuggled here is actually our verb. It has a tense and it has a grammatical subject. Loving is actually functioning like an adverb. It's commenting on the sentence overall, right? It's telling you how they felt about snuggling. And then lastly, let's try one with singing. Okay. Alice singing loudly smiled on stage. Okay. Smiled is our finite verb. Okay. Here, singing loudly is telling us what Alice is doing, right? So it's actually modifying Alice. So it is functioning much more like an adjective in this sentence. So none of these forms of the verb have a grammatical subject and they don't show tense. And so for those reasons, these are non-finite forms of verbs. Um, Infinitives are non-finite forms of verbs. Every once in a while, a past tense form of a verb that doesn't have a grammatical subject is a non-finite verb. So it's just important for you to be able to distinguish between what is a finite verb that will function like a predicate in a sentence because it has a grammatical subject and a tense, and what is not.